Hello, and thank you very much for coming along again this evening. This evening we're going to look at a very big problem, and it's just come up recently in terms of public awareness. The reason is that there's been a very important study that's just been published and just came out in August 6th in fact. And it highlights this problem between feedback loops in the global ecosystem and the dangers we face even if we wanted to cut carbon and started to cut carbon at this point. But we're not going yet in that direction. So we're looking at heading beyond the point of no return. National carbon policies, Hothouse Earth, and the crying need for global leadership. The problem is that Hothouse Earth is the new description of what's coming on here, and it's absolutely staggering in its implications. Because of the feedback loops, things can be set beyond the point of no return. Feedback loops of climate events could push Earth into a hothouse state, scientists warn. Cascade of 10 events could put Earth on a trajectory for ruinous effects by the end of the century. They referred to it as the domino effect of climate events, saying it could move Earth into a hothouse state. I'd urge you to look all these issues up on Transition Studies website and call up the scientific report, which itself is called Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene. As I say, it was published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on August 6th. It's published ahead of the print. The print edition hasn't even come out yet, but it's published ahead of the print edition on August 6th. So it's available online, and you can get it at transitionstudies.net. What's it say? Well, it says in the abstract, we explore the risk that self-reinforcing feedbacks could push the Earth system toward a planetary threshold that, if crossed, could prevent stabilization of the climate and cause continued warming on a hothouse Earth pathway, even as human emissions are reduced. If we're on a hothouse Earth pathway, as they say, you can even try to cut emissions, and they succeed in cutting emissions, but it won't do any good because it'll be a runaway situation. Crossing the threshold would lead to a much higher global average temperature. The resulting trajectory would likely cause serious disruptions to ecosystems, society, and economies. Collective human action is required to steer the Earth system away from a potential threshold and stabilize it in a habitable state. Okay, this comes out on August 6th. Some of the individuals are interviewed, and I'd urge you to get in touch with them and listen to the interviews on transition studies, but particularly Professor Johan Rockström from the Institute of Sustainability Studies in Stockholm, Sweden. Environmental sciences, he's listed as here, but he's really the one who's been keeping track of the interaction of these things. Take a look.
Crops dying, less food, less water, people getting upset and having to migrate from where they're living. We can think all sorts of extreme examples, but let's hope we don't get there and we can do something to stop it happening before it gets there.
This is Professor Joanna Hay, a co-director of the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and Environment at Imperial College London. Her prediction, if the world continues polluting as per current trends, is a future ravaged by climate change and preoccupied with natural and humanitarian crises. These images were not simulations for the future, but news coverage from this summer, the summer of 2018. The 2018 summer has brought climate change to the center of the world's attention. When southern Europe reached abnormal highs close to 44 degrees Celsius in August, alarm bells started ringing across Europe and across the world. While continuing climate change is widely acknowledged, a new study has claimed that the Earth might just be decades away from an apocalyptic phenomenon called Hothouse Earth that could threaten humanity's very existence. International scientists say that the planet will reach a climatic tipping point when temperatures are 2 degrees Celsius higher than they were in pre-industrial times. They are currently 1 degree higher and are on the rise. The research highlights the projected consequences of 10 climatic changes, also known as tipping elements, that are predicted to take place when the temperatures rise above 2 degrees Celsius. These mechanisms could then act like a row of dominoes, with the temperature stabilizing at a global average of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This is Hothouse Earth. The mechanisms include the release of methane trapped on the ocean floor, rising sea levels from the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, and the dieback of the Amazon forest, the world's largest carbon sink. These will lead to a new normal, from which it may be almost impossible to return. The solution, Haig recommends, reduce emissions swiftly to achieve zero emission status by 2050. But a lack of political will from individual countries and the weakening of climate change mechanisms presents a grim picture indeed.
Yes, a grim picture indeed. In fact, a weakening of climate policies is an understatement. The scientists involved in this have emphasized again and again that we're up against real systemic interactions.
Of course, in this paper, when the dominoes fall, we're talking a 4 to 5 degree rise in temperature with sea levels rising between 10 to 60 meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the situation. If this chain reaction got started, then we believe we would end in a situation where the Earth was what we call Hothouse Earth, which is 4 to 5 degrees warmer. And that would not only mean 10 to 60 meters of sea level rise, it would also mean heat waves like you can't imagine, areas of the Earth where humans would be unable to live, and certainly very much changed and reduced area where we could produce food, massive storms, wildfires, people moving away from regions where they can't produce food or can't survive the temperatures, so potential political conflicts. It would be, and also the animals and the plants that we know today, many of them would go extinct. So it would be an entirely different
world. Completely different world, and one that can be triggered by these interactions. What is the U.S. doing? It's not encouraging.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord
dealing with something clearly political.
Well, the problem here is that withdrawing from the Paris Accord is the only accord we have internationally. And in fact, the administration's done more than just withdraw from the accord. They've started to roll back things.
In the latest attack on environmental regulations, President Trump the Trump administration has drafted a proposal to freeze fuel efficiency automobile standards beginning in 2021. The draft proposal would also challenge California's power to establish its own stronger fuel efficiency rules, setting up the latest potential clash between the state of California and the Trump administration. This is Sierra Club Executive Director Michael Brune speaking on Democracy Now!
Right now, Scott Pruitt is working on undermining the Clean Car Standard, which is a standard that is supported by 90% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, because it cuts air pollution, cuts water pollution and climate pollution, and it saves people money. What it does is makes cars more efficient. It helps people to transition to cleaner vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, electric vehicles, or simply more fuel-efficient vehicles that reduces our dependence on oil, and it makes innovating industries in the auto sector more successful.
Well, that's what the Trump administration is getting rid of. That successful auto standards policy. He loosens auto emission standards. At the same time, he's replacing coal regulations.
Today, the Environmental Protection Agency unveiled new rules on carbon emissions. The proposal is called the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, and it gives states more power in deciding how to regulate coal plant emissions. It is the latest attempt by the Trump administration to chip away at President Obama's efforts at fighting climate change in a bid to help the coal industry. Joining us from Washington is NPR Energy and Environment Editor Jennifer Ludden. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey there.
And tell us more about this proposal. It's just one of many to roll back Obama-era regulations.
Yes, many regulations have been rolled back, but this one and one a few weeks ago on fuel efficiency for cars are really the two big ones. These two sectors, power and transportation, produce the most carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. So what the EPA did today, unlike what Obama tried to do, they set no targets for suggested reductions in carbon emissions. Instead, they just say, look, we're giving states suggestions for ways to make individual coal-fired power plants more efficient, in which process they will also, emit fewer emissions, and they lay out, a several years long process to make that happen.
Well, a several year long process is not acting very decisively against coal. In fact, it's very clear that Trump doesn't care about the environmental impact of coal and the climate impact, at least of all.
As we turn to West Virginia, where President Trump rallied supporters last night to announce a massive rollback of Obama-era environmental regulations on coal-fired power plants and carbon dioxide emissions that contribute to climate change. Trump's affordable clean energy proposal, as he calls it, would allow individual states to decide whether to curb emissions. The Environmental Protection Agency's own data shows the plan could cause up to 1,400 more premature deaths a year by 2030. The Washington Post reports the deregulation would also lead to the release of at least 12 times more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the next decade. The current head of the EPA, Andrew Wheeler, is a former coal industry lobbyist.
Okay, now that's the crucial transformation. They got rid of Pruitt, but his replacement was a former coal industry lobbyist. So, here's the problem. The trouble is that the national carbon policy now being pursued by the Trump administration has global implications. Take a look.
With its disregard of fact and science and the rule of law, the Trump administration is ripping apart the fabric of environmental and human health protections that we've come to count on.
We've come to count on them, and the world has come to count on them. The real question now is what's going to happen throughout the rest of the world, and whether leadership will pass from the United States to other countries to address the global climate crisis. China realizes there's a climate crisis because there are a whole series of coastal cities will be underwater, as the New York Times reports, very quickly because of climate change issues. Sea level rise is not a joke over there. It's not being denied. Cities like Shanghai, with 17 million people, are going to be facing massive dislocations. The big remaining question then is, can other world leaders from India and China provide the global leadership that's so crucial to save global civilization, now that the United States is actually going in exactly the wrong direction, just when the science is becoming more and more urgent and more clear about thresholds, tipping points that will be exceeded. The problem is that humanity as a whole has to get beyond fossil fuels. This has been stated clearly enough to the UN. Take a look.
We're a fossil fuel dependent civilization, independent of what nationality we are. Our modern civilization is dependent on fossil fuels. We have to get to being a solar sustainable system. There's a bit of a transition, right? Transition studies are what's now in every discipline, every department, every university.
The trouble is, we don't have enough time to give out degrees. We don't have enough time to take long-term studies of what we already know is happening. By the time you get the results of a 20 to 30-year study, it's too late to do anything about it. So the effort is going to have to be taken by countries around the world, and in particular the two biggest emitters that are coming along, China and India. This will be a challenge for global leadership, moving beyond the national climate priorities set out in the Paris Accord and starting to work towards a global form of leadership, moving towards renewables.
We're a fossil fuel dependent civilization, independent of what nationality we are. Our modern civilization is dependent on fossil fuels.
Now, that's what we have to get beyond. And we can if we start to focus on it.
Second point about other alternative energies, use the renewable ones. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that nuclear is a solution to anything. If you want to look at externalized costs, think about the tens of thousands of years of the waste products that you have to deal with. We don't even have human languages that have persisted long enough to label the stuff. Right? There used to be a department within the DoD, the Department of Defense in the United States, which is actually trying to think up symbol systems to put on nuclear waste dumps so that people would know after a nuclear exchange had occurred to stay away from this material because it was lethal, because the languages wouldn't be around anymore. Right? We can't cope with the downstream impact of nuclear, let alone the downstream impact of carbon. So don't think nuclear is the solution in this. What you got to do is run the whole thing on the solar throughput. Now that means water, wind, tidal, micro, hydro, and the like. That is, hydro is a function of the water cycle, and you're placing yourself back into a solar-driven system. But the only... See, we've got the thing 180 degrees around. We think we live on a planet with infinite resources and finite energy. We're struggling over to control that finite energy. In fact, in America, it's so absurd. We think the world doesn't quite get it. That's our oil in the Middle East, right? It's just a geologic mistake it's in the Middle East. But it's our oil. And we spend a few $1 billion a day sort of making sure the world understands that. It's our oil. We're on the wrong metaphor in the sense that it's not infinite energy that we have moved to, and we need to. The infinite throughput of solar energy. We're thinking we've got finite energy and infinite resources, whereas in fact we have finite resources and infinite energy. So this isn't just a slight correction in metric here and there. It's a compass question. Are we going in the right direction? Not, are we becoming more efficient in the direction in which we're going? All you'll do with that is sort of make extinction more efficient, which really isn't the goal.
No, making extinction more efficient really isn't the goal. It's avoiding extinction of the modern world that is the goal. And at this point, it really doesn't matter whether you believe in global warming or not. It will still have a dramatic impact on all human life, in fact, all life systems. As this study emphasizes again and again, just published on the 6th of August, we cannot survive as a modern civilization with the disruptions caused by climate change. You can say all you want, I don't believe in global warming, but citizens all over the world need now to reduce carbon emissions drastically and plan together to adapt to climate change, because it's here whether you believe it or not. The dramatic cases are crucial to look at, and the importance of the remaining leaders in the world system is going to be crucial.
The first ever informal summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping is taking place in Wuhan on April 27th and 28th. Now, there is no formal agenda between these two leaders, and government officials are deliberately keeping expectations low. So what is special about this informal summit? Why is the Modi-Xi meeting so important?
Well, you can ask yourself. In fact, the Modi-Xi meeting is so important because the future of humanity depends upon what these countries do with their carbon. Depends upon what all countries do with their carbon. Our national leadership has collapsed totally in the United States on this question. In fact, they've reversed direction and they're starting to go in the opposite direction for stability, towards instability and heightened emissions of carbon. There's a hope that we can change that in the electoral process and keep it at bay through the legal system until there's a new election, but that's longer term than is needed. We need action now with leadership that in effect sees the global importance of stepping forward and acting beyond national carbon policies to develop a global carbon policy. This is why it's so crucial that we learn how to move beyond the nation state toward global leadership. It's very much the hope of the entire world that that global leadership can emerge not any longer from the United States, but from a combination of countries around the world that realize that the big problem is for all of humanity as a whole to get beyond fossil fuels and run the system on the infinite source of solar throughput. Extinction is not the goal, and now China and India must take the lead in being the leaders.